Okay, moving into Module 2, team communication, teamwork, listening, conflict, and feedback. Just a quick overview of what you'll learn in this module. You'll see here the 5 bullet points. By the end of this module, you'll understand first the meaning of high-performing teams. You'll know the 5 stages of teams: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. You'll know how to practice active listening skills. We'll walk through what that means. You'll know the best practices for managing conflict and difficult situations, and you'll know how to provide feedback to peers and employees. So this module is broken into 5 different segments. Let's walk through what each of those will look like. In Module 2.1, we're just going to talk about what it means to work with people, how that differs when we're in person versus remote. We'll walk through some intercultural considerations, and then we'll walk through culture difference and inclusivity in the workplace. Next, we're going to talk about in 2.2, working in teams. We'll identify what this term high-performing teams means, and then we'll walk through the 5 stages of team development: forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Then in 2.3, we'll talk about what it means to be an active listener. We'll talk about what that active listening means, the paradox of listening, and then we'll go through 7 steps to becoming an active listener. In 2.4, we're going to talk about conflict management, how to perceive conflict, the 3 types of workplace conflict: task, relationship, and value conflict. And then lastly, we'll talk about the 6 steps for resolving conflict. And then in 2.5, we'll talk about giving feedback, why feedback matters, feedback versus performance reviews. There is a difference. We'll walk through those. Then we're going to talk about the 3 elements of good feedback. We'll walk through the GROW, the GROW model. And then lastly, we'll walk through 5 steps to delivering feedback. All right, well, looking forward to seeing you in Module 2.1. All right, in Module 2.1, we're going to talk about working with people, kind of more broadly what that means to be thinking about all the different complexities and challenges and opportunities that it means to work with people. So here's the starting question. What does it mean to work with people? That might seem like an obvious question, but I'm going to start with a fairly lengthy description of what it means coming from the Human Resources Department of Canada. This is what they say. Working with others is the ability to effectively interact, cooperate, collaborate, and manage conflicts with other people in order to complete tasks and achieve shared goals. This includes working with one other person or working in small or large groups of people, for example, coworkers, managers, employees, clients, and contractors. And they go on to say effectively working with others in the workplace involves understanding and working within the group's culture, rules, and values, joint planning and decision-making, negotiating and compromising, expressing one's opinions and ideas and respecting those of others, including people of different backgrounds, and being flexible in terms of roles, including when knowing to take a leadership role and knowing when to seek a team approach. Okay, so why start off with a lengthy description like that? Well, you can see I've highlighted several terms in that definition there, working with others. It is complicated to work in teams and to work with people. Working with people means we have to interact, cooperate, complete tasks, achieve shared goals. We have to understand. We're talking about things like group culture, rules, values, joint planning, decision-making, negotiating, compromising, expressing opinions, respecting others, differing backgrounds. A lot going on here. And so as we go through this Module 2.1, what I want to do is quickly just have this kind of at the forefront of your mind. We're going to walk through some of the complexities and challenges, just so we have that kind of awareness that working with people is both exciting and complicated, and there's some things that we want to be thinking about. What I want to say is that working with people does basically mean communication. When we work with people, we have to communicate. It requires us to be 3 primary things. First of all, inclusive. It requires us to be culturally aware, and it requires us to be flexible. And if we can do those 3 things, we're going to be in pretty good shape. So just for the rest of this segment, we're going to talk about just 3 broad considerations to be thinking about as we're interacting and working with people. First of all, working with people, some inclusivity considerations, how to be inclusive. All right, so you'll see here at the top left, for teams to work well, all members must be inclusive. So what does that mean? Well, I like this thought that comes from author Meredith Hart. She writes for OWL Labs. She says this: inclusivity is when individuals with different identities and backgrounds are welcomed in a group setting, something like a company office or meeting, and they are valued members of the group. Not only does inclusion mean these team members feel that they belong, but they are also trusted and relied upon to contribute to the team. So inclusivity is more than just feeling welcomed or being treated nicely, but also that people feel that their contributions are valued, they're making a difference, people are relying on them for work just like everyone else is relying on each other. So you're an equal member of the team. To be inclusive when it comes to communication, it means using inclusive language. You'll see here on the left, inclusive language means using words and phrases that make people feel included and respected, regardless of race, gender, sex, orientation, ability, age, ethnicity, religion, or other defining characteristics. Using inclusive language is people-focused, and that's a key. It's really important, rather than attribute-driven, allowing people to identify positively with others rather than through negative or unnecessary labels and stereotypes. So one of the more common ones we hear about is gendered language. In particular, in English, we talk about gendered language a lot. You'll see here on the right some of the things to avoid and then try. For example, if you don't know somebody's preferred pronoun, stick with they or their until you know for sure that they prefer to go by him or her or she. Words that have specific gendered connotations like stewardess or actress or waitress that have that kind of female-focused terminology in it, we don't need to use terms like that because that unnecessarily draws attention to gender. Rather, be equal in your conversation and say something like flight attendant or actor. Same thing with words that have like man at the end, like congressman. Well, congressman is not usually a term that a person who identifies as female would use. Therefore, it's not an inclusive term. So say something more like congressperson or legislator, a term that is gender neutral. You can see here, I won't go through every single one of these terms, but you'll notice the one on the left, the terms to avoid, tend to have either a very negative connotation to it, or they have something that draws attention unnecessarily to gender. But there are more types of inclusive language that we want to address besides just gender. For example, there's ability language. We want to avoid anything that draws negative attention to an individual and make sure that it is people-focused. So rather than, again, identifying the attribute like disabled, handicapped, crippled, or challenged, those all have kind of negative connotations. We focus on the person. This is a person with a disability, or this is a person who uses a wheelchair, but it's a person first language. In addition, sometimes we'll get caught saying language that has negative connotations and meanings and stereotypes for people of different locations and regions. And race and races. So you'll see here on the left there, you want to avoid things that are kind of broadly generic, saying someone's Oriental or Asian or African or American or something like that. We want to make sure we're very specific to their country and their region, but also be asking yourself if identifying someone by their region is even necessary, because often it's not. We don't need to use someone's specific identity, specific region or location to identify them. Also, you can see some other terms like alien and foreigners sounds kind of negative. Let's talk about people with that people-focused language. And so you can see some of those other terms that are more negative and more positive. And if you want to pause the video and identify and review each of these terms, I encourage you to do so one at a time. Just be aware also some other religion language. Sometimes there are terms and phrases that we use colloquially to talk about people in different religions, but we want to be using the terms and the phrases that the people of those religions identify as. For example, Bible thumper or holy roller is not a respectful term for people who would say maybe a practicing Christian or evangelical Protestant. Mormon is often used as a colloquial term, but members of that faith prefer to be called members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We should be using the terms that people prefer to be called. Again, there's addiction language. We want to avoid any of those negative connotations and focus on people and positive focused terms. Also, there's mental health language that we want to avoid, things like mentally ill, mentally disabled, crazy. We want to say things more like a person with this particular diagnosis or a person with this disease. Again, you'll notice most of these have that person first language. And then also there's sometimes socioeconomic language that creeps into our vocabulary when we say things like homeless or disadvantaged or inner city or ghetto. There are better terms. So this takes practice as you're thinking about avoiding gendered language, addiction language, religion language. We want to make sure we're being as respectful and inclusive as possible, remembering to be people first and not unnecessarily labeling people as stereotypes or other attributes that don't uh, that aren't necessary to that part of the conversation in which they're in. All right, so second thing, in addition to being inclusive, we want to be thinking about intercultural considerations, which of course is related to inclusivity, but we live and work in very multicultural, international world where we're connected with people all over the world. So there's a few things we want to be thinking about in addition to that when we're working with people. So culturally diverse teams create many advantages, and that's the key I wanted to leave you with. There's a real positive thing to us working with people in other cultures. And in fact, you'll see here on the right, research has shown very clear evidence that culturally diverse teams have a positive effect. You'll see here, they are more creative, they're more innovative, they're more productive, they're more motivated, they're better at solving problems, they have lower turnover rates. There's an increased market knowledge, which creates competitive advantage for companies. Multicultural teams allow for stronger personal and professional growth. You can see all of the many advantages to working in multicultural teams. Always be thinking of inclusivity and multiculturalism as a positive feature of where you work. But I do want to address that when it comes to communication, culturally diverse teams must overcome some challenges. And it's important to be aware of these challenges so that we can work to embrace them and overcome them. So you can see here, teams with diverse cultural backgrounds do sometimes experience negative stereotypes or prejudices that interfere with team integration as people don't necessarily understand each other's culture or background. Sometimes those stereotypes, unfortunately, get brought into the workplace. Sometimes there's misunderstandings in behavior, attitudes, and language. Some cultures interact differently with things like handshakes and welcoming and personal space. So there's misunderstandings that happen. Conflicting perspectives on what is professional etiquette. Some organizations view one thing as being professional etiquette, other cultures view something different. And when you're working together, sometimes those tend to have conflicting things and experiences. Some colleagues can also feel like their voices aren't always being heard, especially if they are in a region where it is dominated by one particular culture. You can feel like an outsider and sometimes not always feel like your voice is being heard. It's important to be aware of these challenges because that's what helps us overcome them. The great thing is that, again, if we embrace multiculturalism and inclusivity as an important part of our workplace, we can recognize that when these challenges arise, they're normal, they're natural, and we can overcome them through conversation and communication. Okay, the third thing I want to just quickly address in this 2.1 is working with people, remote work considerations. So in addition to being inclusive and multicultural, we live in a time when it's hard to know the best way to interact with people. A lot of times we're online, sometimes we're in synchronous environments, sometimes we're asynchronous. So just a few things to consider in regards to this. So there's some positives and some challenges with in-person communication with people and also with remote work with people. So let's kind of look at a few of those. In-person work allows for a rich conversation, strong relationship building, easier and more efficient brainstorming, fluid conversation and engagement, less concern for technology issues. Working in person tends to reduce the number of communication barriers. And so when possible, it's usually encouraged to work in person. Granted, there are still some challenges when we're working with people in present physical spaces. First of all, it tends to be more time consuming. We get a little bit more on track in conversations. People sometimes have to drive in or coordinate schedules. Sometimes that can be difficult. Yet it requires a physical space where all can fit and feel included in the conversation. And if you're working with a lot of people, 30, 40, 50 people, sometimes that's not real feasible in an in-person environment. And sometimes physical spaces aren't as accessible to all people. So if we want to be inclusive to everyone of all abilities and circumstances, sometimes those in-person environments do exclude people. So we want to be conscious of that. So thinking then about remote communication, that has also its advantages and disadvantages. It saves time. There doesn't tend to be need to travel, book a room, or coordinate a lot of those logistics that we see with in-person physical spaces. So you can usually get more people involved with less coordination. Typically, it cuts out the small talk, saving more time and increasing focus. Now, there is a benefit of small talk. So losing that is kind of a lost opportunity to get to know people better. But it does save time, and you can often increase the focus of your meetings. People can contribute in multiple formats. So chat, sound, video, where someone might not feel comfortable speaking up, especially perhaps if the dominant language in the room is not their primary or native language. They can feel a little bit more intimidated to comment. But if you give them opportunities in a virtual space to, for example, write in a chat feature or something like that, it tends to be more inviting and inclusive in that remote space. Also, closed captions and individuals' personal location make accessibility issues much better and easier. So, however, there are some challenges. The human connection is weaker. So if you're really trying to build team unity, team connection, personal relationships, that's much harder to do virtually. It also does require a strong internet connection, good speakers, and high quality video, which not all people in all locations have access to, which can then exclude some people. And then it does encourage some employees to be less engaged, muting video and audio and not participating. All right, so those are just kind of some of the things when we're talking about in-person versus remote work. Just one last thing I want to talk about there is when possible, you want to be toggling between synchronous and asynchronous communication to ensure that you're keeping your team engaged. You'll see here, if you look at this diagram on the screen, that sometimes we need rich dialogue and discussion, and sometimes we can get away with lean communication and dialogue, and we can switch between synchronous and asynchronous to do those things. Now, if you're not familiar with those terms, synchronous means live and in person, where it's happening in real time. For example, in like a video conference or an in-person meeting. Asynchronous, on the other hand, is where you deliver a message and you wait some period of time to get a response. For example, like if you send an email or a text message, or maybe on a project management app where there is some gap in time where you're waiting to get responses back. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but we want to be aware of all that's possible. So again, as we're thinking through working with people in this segment, we've just talked about briefly what it means to be inclusive, what it means to be thinking about multicultural opportunities and challenges, and then also what it means to be working in asynchronous and synchronous live and remote environments. Some of the things to be thinking about as we're going to go through the next several segments, but we just want to be aware of some of these opportunities and challenges. All right, well, let's go ahead and move into some specifics now in Module 2.2. We're going to walk through working in teams and the 5 stages. We'll see you next. All right, now that you're thinking about kind of a broad overview of what it means to be working with people, in Module 2.2 now we're going to get more specific about what it means to work in teams. We're going to break that down into the 5 stages of team development. All right, so let's start here. Good communication is about more than efficiency. A lot of times we think about communication as a means to becoming more efficient. And while that's true, we are more efficient when we communicate well in teams. There is more to communicating well than just efficiency. Realize that when you communicate well as a team, you build healthy relationships, which makes your workplace more enjoyable and meaningful. You increase employee engagement. People are more likely to work well on their projects and work if communication is strong. It improves physical and mental well-being when communication is healthy and well. We see here increases innovation. Good communication boosts transparency and shared vision, and it reduces conflict. So again, when you're thinking about creating good, strong communication within your team, many reasons why we want to communicate well as a team. Still, though, efficiency does matter, and there's this concept of high-performing teams that you'll hear about a lot if you're researching what it means to work in teams. high-performing teams. That does kind of lean towards this idea of efficiency. So in addition to all those other amazing benefits and improving your work culture and your healthy relationships and being more productive and motivated and engaged, high-performing teams are also going to allow us to be more productive. So you can see here, a high-performing team is a group of individuals that work with well-defined complementary skills and talents who support one another, work at high levels of collaboration, and innovate to achieve shared goals. So again, if we can improve our communication, we can become a more high-performing team as well. So a few things to talk about how to use communication to create a high-performing team. First of all, as a team, whenever you're working in a group, whether it's a new group or someone you've been working with for a while, it's important that you create a shared vision. Work together on this. Prepare a written document that outlines the collective vision of the group and or the project. So if you tend to work on different projects with different teams at different times, start here. Create that shared vision. If you've always been on the same team forever, but you don't have a clear shared vision, I would encourage you to create one. Second, then define your goals together. Clearly outline the goals, objectives, strategies, and tactics that will help achieve the shared vision so that you're all on the same page to begin with. Again, if you're trying to move towards more efficiency and high performance, then you want to make sure the goals are all clearly defined together. Establish clear roles and responsibilities. One of the biggest challenges we see in workplace conflict is when people don't understand their role or their responsibility or how it fits within the bigger group or in the company. So use each other's strengths to maximize talent and contribution. Ensure that all understand their roles and contributions and write them down. Make deadlines and expectations clear and then hold each other accountable. This is really important as you're establishing a team to make sure that everybody clearly understands their role. If those aren't clearly defined, challenges and frustrations tend to occur. Okay, and then stay flexible. Meet regularly to assess and reassess your project group. Adjust your vision, goals, and responsibilities along the way. Good teams recognize that things are going to constantly change. Personnel will change, the project itself will change, goals might be modified, circumstances will adjust your needs. It's important that you're always flexible and willing to reassess as a group, as a team, how the project has evolved and where we need to keep moving forward. So be fluid in the process of teamwork. Okay, a few other things you want to do to be a high performance team. Trust each other and allow autonomy. So people perform better when they are trusted and can work without micromanagement. If each individual of the team feels like they are empowered to do their work at their best ability and their roles and responsibilities are directly related to their talents and skills, trust them. Allow people to do their best work without being micromanaged. Micromanagement causes stress and it tends to prohibit people's ability to do their best work. Give regular and fair feedback. So plan feedback sessions where team members can learn how to grow and improve. Be fair and consistent in your feedback, approach, and praise. And then lastly, stay democratic. Good, high-performing teams let everyone provide feedback and insight. While you'll likely have a team leader or a manager or somebody that does direct the group and make ultimate decisions, you want to avoid this idea of groupthink. Groupthink is this idea where voices are silenced and teams follow the more dominant personality, and we want to avoid that. Make sure everyone's voice is heard. We can keep moving forward together to become a more high-performing team. All right, with those concepts in mind, let's break down what the 5 stages of team development are. We're going to go through forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. You'll notice the rhyme there. You have likely heard these terms before. This is a widely used perspective on how to understand group development. Now, these 5 stages you'll see, as I've written here at the top, are not meant to identify problems necessarily, but if every member of the team understands the 5 stages, they're more likely to be able to adjust and adapt when problems arise because they can recognize where they're at within the stage and have to regroup, refocus, and move forward. So we'll kind of walk through this. You'll see that I've written the 5 stages, if known and understood by a team, are useful for maintaining cohesion and to create team conversation, but not necessarily to diagnose problems. It's just to help create cohesion. So make sure everyone on your team knows all 5 of these stages. Let's walk through what each of them are. So first is the forming stage. This is when your team gets to know each other. When you're first put together as a group, you're getting to know each other's personalities, their differences, their strengths and weaknesses, and kind of what they can contribute to the team. You'll see there's a lot of emotions that happen in this first forming stage. People tend to be excited and anxious at the same time. They're excited about um, what can happen with the project. There's usually high expectations and positive emotions for the team and the project, but there's also some nervousness about how each person will fit into the group and how individual skills will meet the team's needs. Recognize that as you feel those emotions, everyone else is feeling those same emotions. That's common. And then the behaviors that tend to show up during the forming stage is the conversations and questions. People are asking about each other, they're getting to know each other, they're reflecting together collectively on the project, what it's going to look like, what they're excited about, some of the challenges they are expecting, but then also getting to know each other and sharing all of their kind of concerns and things to overcome. So it's just kind of this initial conversation that you'll see happening. So during forming, a few things that you want to do. First of all, create a mission and goals. Develop together a forward-thinking projection of where this project is going to take you. Then you want to establish a structure and process for collaboration. How are we going to work this out? What are our schedules? What's going to be the process? Maybe who's going to be doing what to begin with and that sort of thing. But establish that structure and process. Define your roles based on skills, talents, and interests. So make sure you recognize who is good at what. If you have a really good project manager that might serve well as a leader, great. If you have somebody else that's a great writer or designer, maybe they're put into that area. Maybe they're a really good researcher on your team. Maybe you can break up into groups or subgroups. But define those roles based on those skills, talents, and knowledge. Be a lot more efficient and productive. You'll create a better product if you can assign roles based on strengths and interests. Okay, once you've moved past the forming stage, we move into what's called the storming stage. Now, storming means a couple of different things. Sometimes we think of it in terms of brainstorming, but often it means more like kind of addressing those first initial conflicts. There's kind of a storm brewing. You see here the team breaks down the tasks and develops a process and plan, but it tends to create a new set of challenges and problems that you didn't necessarily recognize in the forming stage. So you'll see here in the emotions, your initial excitement tends to wear off and reality sets in. Frustration may occur as team members don't meet their initial expectations. Team members get a sense for how others behave. You start seeing people's work habits. You start seeing, how people interact with others, how you're getting maybe pieces of a project accomplished, and it can be a little bit frustrating at first. You'll see here in the behaviors, there's additional conversation and questions. You're continuing to share anxieties or concerns for the project. So it's very similar in terms of behavior to that forming stage. But it's important to recognize that this is a very natural and normal part of team development, and it almost always happens at some point. And it's usually earlier on, within a few weeks, depending on the project, maybe even a few months if it's a really lengthy project. But you start identifying issues with each other, with the project, with your process. So during the storming stage, you want to do a few things. Refocus any goals that seem unrealistic. Get back together and say, okay, we started with this plan. It's not working as we thought. Let's refocus those areas that aren't totally working. Let's reestablish any team member roles that aren't functioning well for that individual or for the team. Maybe some roles need to be realigned and redesigned and rewritten. And then determine goals for breaking down complex goals into more manageable tasks. You start realizing, oh, this is more complicated than we thought. Let's break this into subparts. Let's reflect again on the schedule or the process. And then you want to refine skills and or create processes that make the project move more smoothly. So you might recognize, we don't have this particular skill set. We need to go get some training on this, or we need to learn something new before we can effectively move forward, or we just need to adjust our process to make it work better. All right, so that's, and then number 5, we've got the work out conflicts and have a plan for future potential conflicts. So if you start identifying problems early, walk through those. And later in module 2, we're going to talk through conflict management, but you'll do some of that conflict management early on in the storming stage. All right, next we move into what's called the norming stage. This is where you start to get into a flow as a team and you start recognizing how to overcome some of those initial barriers that you discovered in the storming stage. So the team begins to work through their established process. So in this stage, the emotions you'll likely be feeling are an increased sense of comfort and understanding individual and team members' roles and habits. There will be a more of an ease in sharing emotions and concerns with each other. Constructive criticism becomes more possible, and it's even welcomed as a team. So if you have not arrived yet at a space where you as a team can provide constructive feedback and criticism to each other, you're probably still in that storming phase, and you want to make sure you can move towards the norming stage, which will make you more of a high-performing team as well. Members feel valued and included, and their contributions are recognized and important. Okay, and then the behaviors is an effort to create harmony, increased sharing and helping each other out. Relationships start to build. You start recognizing gaps where somebody might be lacking. You just step in and help them. You understand how you fit within the bigger group, and everybody seems to collaborate at a more smooth pace. So during the norming phase, you want to work towards increased productivity and efficiency. Reevaluate your remaining processes, assignments, or roles that need to be ironed out. And that's about it there. We're going to move into now performing. Performing is kind of where you're a well-oiled machine. This is where you start working really well as a team. Individuals move smoothly through tasks while accomplishing all those team goals that you set out and refined and reevaluated. So emotion is here. You should start feeling satisfaction about team progress and accomplishments, of awareness of the weaknesses and strengths and the ability to move past those, a feeling of the doing something for the group and feeling confident. So again, if you're not quite to this emotional state, you probably haven't as a team arrived at the performing stage. Behaviors, usually you have engagement and effort increase toward accomplishment. Roles become more fluid as team members realize where and how to naturally help. So during the performing stage, you just want to make progress and accomplish, work towards getting this thing done. Tweak the processes as necessary. Inevitably, things will just keep coming up, but for the most part, things should be at a pretty smooth pace. And then just expect some change in personnel or project requirements to determine how to revise processes or goals as needed. Okay, and then lastly is adjourning. This is where you complete the project and you may dissolve as a team. So in this state, a lot of times there's a sense of satisfaction coupled with this kind of sadness or anxiety for the future. You might be sad that your team is dissolving, or you have to start a new project. You may be a little anxious about what's happening next. But the behavior, this is an effort towards achieving closure and ending on a positive note. So during the adjourning stage, you want to complete and submit any final deliverables as a team. All that was expected of you needs to be polished off and sent off. And then evaluate the effectiveness of the team and record the lessons learned. And that's important to write that down and keep a record of all that you learned and accomplished in this particular project as a team. Your processes, your goals, your challenges, the way you overcame those challenges, all that should be recorded so that the next time you as a team get together or another team gets together on a similar project, there's a record of that, and you can start building a collection of best practices. And then celebrate the team and individual accomplishments. It's an opportunity to take a moment and say, hey, we did it, and celebrate together on those accomplishments. Okay, remember that process there. When all members of the team understand the 5 stages and where the team fits within them, it can be easier to have a dialogue, resolve differences, get on the same page, and work more efficiently. And that's the idea of understanding the 5 stages of team development. Okay, now we're going to keep moving forward. In the next video, we're going to talk about active listening as an approach to working with people and in teams. So we'll see you in the next video. All right, as we continue to talk about what it means to work with people and in teams, let's talk about active listening, which is a really important part of working with others. So Module 2.3, active listening. So why does active listening matter? Well, here's a great thought from the University of Southern California. They posted on their website, recent research has shown that poor listening habits and listening skills affect more than 70% of all employees, resulting in misunderstandings, errors, missed opportunities, arguments, stalled projects, and damaged relationships. You can see not being a good listener causes all kinds of problems in the workplace. We need to be better listeners. Now, sometimes we're kind of focus so on the things that we need to get done and what matters to us that we tend to avoid listening at a high level. But I love this thought here from Amy Cuddy. She is a social psychologist, TED speaker, author of a few fantastic books. But she makes this thought about the paradox of listening. She says, quote, "The paradox of listening is that by relinquishing power, the power of speaking, asserting, knowing, we gain power." She goes on to say that by listening, we acquire useful info, we gain allies, we develop better solutions that people are willing to adopt. People who feel heard are more willing to listen. So you can see all of the great advantages to listening well, yet many of us are not all that great at listening. So what exactly is this idea of active listening? What does that phrase mean? Let's walk that through a little bit. Well, first of all, it's more than just staying silent while the other person talks. That's not enough. It's also not enough just to nod your head and look like you're listening. It is a communication skill. It does require practice, and there's a few things that we need to do to get better at it. First of all, we need to pay more attention. First of all, we need to pay attention, use effective body language. We need to withhold judgment, build confidence in the speaker. We need to clarify their perspective. We need to summarize key points, and we need to then share our own perspective. So 7 different things that we can do here to become better active listeners. We're going to walk through these one at a time to give you that kind of formula for becoming a better active listener. So first, rule number 1, pay attention. What does it mean to actually pay attention in practice? Well, a few things. First of all, we need to look at the person as best we can, as able as we are, to look at them in the face and the eyes. That tends to communicate to them that we are listening, and it also helps us to listen in general. We need to recognize our own state of mind. This is part of that emotional intelligence that we were talking about in Module 1. But understanding our own state and our emotional experience and what we're feeling at the time. We might be tired, we might be exhausted, we might be frustrated. All of those different states of mind can sometimes get in the way of us listening. We have to identify that and try to push anything that's going to get in the way of us listening. And then we need to wait before responding. Allow the person to totally finish their thoughts before we respond to them. Some things that you don't want to do in terms of paying attention. Don't ever cut off or finish the person's sentences. That suggests that you're not fully listening and you're not allowing the person to formulate their own thoughts. Formulate a response. Don't do that before they have finished. Make sure that you have listened to everything they've said before you formulate a response. Think about, don't be thinking about other things, things you have to get done, things that are happening in your family or your personal life or projects or other things that are going on. Recognize that as you start to do that, you lose your ability to retain what somebody is saying. Okay, so the first one, paying attention, seems kind of obvious. Let's move into some more specific ones. To become an active listener, rule number 2, use effective body language. There are some things you can do to show that you are actively listening to somebody else. So some things to do. Be close enough to hear well. That might seem obvious, but if you're having a hard time hearing, ask if you can move a little bit closer so that you can hear. Again, maintain good eye contact. Lean towards the speaker. You can see even in this image here how that person there on the right is leaning towards the person speaking. That tends to help to be a better active listener. Smile or acknowledge whatever the mood it is. Make the person speaking feel like you understand the mood that they're communicating to you. Open your body up. This is kind of a big one in terms of body language. Put your arms out, your heads up, and your shoulders high. You want to be avoiding things like folding your arms, looking down, slouching, being closed up, closing legs, folding arms. Those things communicate that you're not as open and listening to the other person, or that they make you sometimes look disinterested in what they have to say. Occasionally nod your head. Make those movements that suggest you are recognizing their points and their arguments and the things that they have to say. You can nod occasionally as well. Mirror their expressions. As they smile, you can smile with them. As they get upset, kind of show that same expression or something similar, so they know that you're feeling and understanding what they're explaining to you. Don't lean back. That can communicate that you don't care, or that you're not as interested in them. Don't look away for noticeable amounts of time. If you're staring at your phone or staring at the wall or the ceiling or at traffic or whatever it is that you're, looking out the window, that could be problematic for someone that's trying to speak to you. And then again, don't fold your arms cross legs. Hide your hands in things like pockets or coats. And don't bend downwards. Always kind of keep that open face. So body language can make a big difference in the way that someone perceives you as listening to them. So good active listening requires some physical movement. Okay, and then don't look at things like your window or your phone. Okay, let's move into rule number 3, withhold judgment. Okay, so keep an open mind. Recognize that when someone is speaking, they might have an opinion that doesn't necessarily immediately resonate with you. You might not totally understand where they're going with their comments, but keep an open mind. Recognize that they might have something that can enlighten you or change your perspective. Ask questions after they are finished. When you ask questions in the middle of what they're saying or you interject, that can sometimes feel like you're judging them or interjecting in a way that makes them feel less likely to comment on what they had to say. Respect cultural differences. Recognize that people that come from different cultures and backgrounds than you might have different mannerisms or different ways of saying things, or if they say something in a language that's not their native language, it may come out a little bit different. They might just act or think differently than you do because of the way you're raised. Respect that. That's not a problematic thing. It's a good thing, and we need to be conscious of that. So listen to understand, not to discount or reject. The idea is that we're not trying to listen to everything they're doing wrong or everything they're saying that is incorrect or every fallacy in their argument that they make, but rather listen to understand their perspective. Okay, what we don't want to do is interrupt or interject. We don't want to argue before hearing them first, and we don't want to make assumptions, especially because of their language, their culture, accent, age, dress, or appearance. Sometimes we have an internal bias about the way somebody looks or sounds or acts, and we make assumptions. We want to avoid that. Recognize that if you're starting to make assumptions, to push those out and say, okay, I am making a biased assumption about this person simply because of the way they look or the way they sound. And that's going to really get in the way of you listening to them effectively. Okay, becoming an active rule listener, rule number 4, build the speaker's confidence. This one's a big one we don't necessarily think about a lot, but we're going to get better communication, a better conversation, better comments from the individual if we can build their confidence. So a few ways to do that. First of all, make the conversation a positive experience. Again, make them feel like they're being heard. Nod, smile, be welcoming and engaging. Show and visually express confidence in them. As they say things, acknowledge that you understand what they're saying and that what they are saying has validity to it. Even if you don't totally agree, you can say, I completely understand why you think and feel that way. Help them to feel safe, that this is an environment in which they can genuinely be authentic and share their emotions and their experiences and their feelings, rather than making them feel uncomfortable or in some kind of an awkward power dynamic where what they say will cause judgment or something like that. So we want to avoid that. So do also view the conversation as a cooperative exchange. You're in this together. You're listening to them. They're listening to you. This is a cooperation. This is not you dominating. This is not them dominating. This is a chance to cooperate through the exchange. Okay, so don't have a competitive spirit or try to win the conversation. That tends to lower a speaker's confidence. Don't seek errors in judgment, flaws in speech, or logical fallacies. If they say something that's grammatically incorrect, or they use the wrong word, or if they make an error in judgment or fallacy, don't be looking for those things. You're not trying to actively look for everything they're doing wrong. In other words, give them the benefit of the doubt as they're speaking and listen to what they're doing well and what they're saying that makes sense. Okay, becoming an active listener, rule number 5. You want to clarify their perspective. Okay, so to do this, first of all, ask questions. So if they're saying something that maybe isn't totally clear to you, feel very comfortable to say, hey, let me see if I'm clear. So you are saying that this is that, right? And so you're asking for that clarification. You can ask them to repeat. Sorry, I didn't quite follow that. Would you mind saying that again? And let them repeat. So again, you're trying to gain an understanding of their perspective, and allowing them the opportunity to clarify that. So if there's any gaps in your own understanding, allow them to clarify it. And then also ask open-ended questions. So what did you mean by this? You said this earlier. What did you mean by that term or that phrase or that concept? Okay, some things to avoid as you're trying to clarify their perspective. Don't tell them what they mean. Okay, if it didn't come out right or they said something in a way that didn't make a lot of sense to you, help them or allow them to clarify what they mean. Don't correct them before they finish. If they said something that didn't make a lot of sense, allow them to get through their thoughts and say, okay, this is what you said. Is that what you actually meant? Okay, rule number 6, you want to summarize their key points. Once they're done speaking and you're kind of concluding your conversation, you want to summarize. So summarize your key themes throughout the conversation. So if it's a long and lengthy conversation, you might say, okay, this is what we've been saying so far. This is making sense. Okay, ensure that you both understand the key points and whatever next steps might be happening. And then consider a direct statement like this. Let me understand to make sure, let me summarize to make sure I understand. You talked about this, this, and this. And if there's anything that's wrong, that gives them, again, an opportunity to clarify anything else. And then repeat any actions that you need to perform. If they've asked you to do something, say, okay, so you need me to do this, and then this, and they can, again, confirm or correct that. Don't leave with any questions unanswered. If you still feel like something's vague in your mind, you'll need to either say, hey, I'm going to need to meet with you at another time to go through this because I'm not totally sure I understand, or take the time in that moment if you have the time to do it there. But make sure your questions are answered. And don't ignore any actions or responsibilities that you are expected to perform. If you were given some direction, make sure that you follow through with those. Okay, and then an active listener rule number 6. This is to now share your perspective. You'll notice this is rule number 7. It comes last, so you will share your perspective once you've been able to hear the other person's perspective. Now, understanding, of course, that conversations go back and forth. So they go through their perspective, you go through yours, they go through theirs again, and it does go back and forth, but allow each person to conclude their perspective before you share yours. So now that they've shared their perspective, you can share relatable and relevant experiences. It might be similar so that you're in agreement, or it might be contrary so that you are making an argument for an opposing view. Still, you're being respectful, but you're sharing your own point of view. Add your perspective after they've shared theirs. Note ideas that were triggered in the conversation. So if they shared a story, gave an example, mentioned a particular piece of data or something like that, you might say, hey, you talked about this. I want to talk about that for just a second. Then also raise any unanswered questions. So what we still don't know is this. And then arrive at a clear closing of the conversation. Make sure that you're both finished with saying what you have to say. Don't leave the conversation without closure. Don't just walk away or leave without understanding everything that needs to be understood. And then don't unnecessarily close the conversation to future dialogue. If you just shut the other person down or just end it abruptly, that doesn't allow what needs to be said to be said. All right, that's what it means to be an active listener. Now we're going to move into the next phase in Module 2.4 about conflict management. Okay, to this point in Module 2, we have talked about working with people and working in teams. We've addressed what it means to be an active listener, what it means to be thinking about multicultural and inclusivity challenges and opportunities. And we've talked about working in high-performing teams and gone through the 5 stages of team development. Now we're going to work through how we work through some conflict. And we addressed that a little bit in the forming and storming stages of team development. Now let's walk through the specific ways in which we can manage conflict. So why is conflict management in a course about communication? Shouldn't that be a course on management or leadership? Well, sure, it belongs there too, but conflict almost always arises from and can only be resolved through communication. Conflict is almost always a communication issue. So of course it makes sense to have it in a communication course. We're talking about conflict resolution. So when you work in teams, it's important to remember a few things. First of all, conflict is inevitable. You should expect and plan for conflict. It is normal. In fact, it's even healthy, which is the next thing. Why would it be healthy? Well, if it's handled well, it can draw attention to inefficiencies, challenges, and bring up new opportunities for better work, for better processes. So it's a good thing to bring that up. And so it also helps people so they don't feel emotionally disconnected, frustrated, angry, or create an inability to do their job well. Conflict can present many opportunities. So when conflicts arise, rather than approaching it with a negative perspective, be positive about it and say, hey, what's the opportunity here that we can improve upon? But to manage conflict, you do need to have a plan in place. So we're going to talk through that in this segment in 2.4. See this thought at the bottom. Conflict should be viewed with a positive frame of mind. It's through conflict that voices are heard, problems are solved, and opportunities for improvement arise. Let's take conflict with a positive approach. Before we get into the steps, I want to walk through 3 different types of conflict that we typically see in the workplace. We have task conflicts, relationship conflicts, and value conflicts. Each of these have kind of their own nuances and challenges to overcome. So let's just kind of walk through what these are briefly. So a task conflict. Well, task conflicts issues arise when roles are vague. If people in your particular team don't understand their role, what they're supposed to be doing, and how they relate in the project and to others. Particular assignments are unclear. If resources are unevenly distributed, sometimes team members can start arguing over who has access to funds or resources or time or things like that. So again, these are all task related. Maybe policies aren't followed or they're understood differently. One team member might understand a policy to mean one thing, while a different team member understands it differently, and there's a conflict that arises because of that. Expectations aren't explained or managed. So maybe one person thinks they're doing just fine and they're meeting expectations, while the other person has different expectations for that individual. So these are the types of conflicts that we call task conflicts. So these are usually the easiest to resolve. They're often more complex than team members initially realize. So again, they're the easiest of the 3 types to resolve, but they tend to be more complex than team members realize. So for example, you might get 2 team members that are arguing over who should be delivering the presentation to a client. The issue may be a simple misunderstanding in roles, but it could be rooted in rivalry or a lack of trust. So it might not simply be resolved by tweaking the roles. It might be more complicated than that. At the surface, maybe it seems simple, but sometimes these issues are bigger. Still, though, typically we can overcome task conflicts relatively quickly by adjusting policy, clarifying roles, or whatever else. But to overcome task conflicts, you typically need leadership intervention to review the deeper needs and the bigger picture of the organization. Sometimes, especially if there's something like a rivalry or lack of trust, a leader has to come in and say, well, we need this person to do the presentation because we need this to happen because. It does require collaborative problem-solving processes to brainstorm new solutions. So if you're going to be able to overcome this, you have to work together to identify the problem and work through it. And then also a collective agreement is necessary as opposed to being forced to do something. You can't force anybody to do something where the conflict doesn't necessarily go away. It just becomes a larger problem down the road. Okay, so those are what we call the task conflict. Let's move into the next one. This is a relationship conflict. Relationship conflict issues arise when there's differences in personality, style, or taste. People just have different ways of viewing the world and the ways of doing things. So team members don't know each other well. They make negative assumptions about each other and their approach to work. These are a little bit more difficult to overcome. You can see here the relationship conflicts are sometimes simple, brief misunderstandings, but sometimes they're complex, deep-rooted issues that have been built over months or years, or sometimes even a lifetime. If one person just sees a particular type of personality or approach to work or life as being totally contrary to their own, it can be sometimes difficult for people to navigate and work through that. So an example, team members struggle to work together because of strong personality differences. They avoid talking to each other, they complain about each other's work style, and they don't like the other's approach to working with clients and things like that. So they're just identifying all the issues that this person has that they do differently than they would. So um, relationship conflicts typically need taking time to get to know each other. You want to spend the time to work with each other. You want to meet together in a safe environment. Discuss the source of tension together, and then listen to the other's perspective. It usually helps to sit down and walk through the issues. If you both recognize there's an issue, it can be helpful to just say, "Hey, let's talk about this. You do things this way. You think this way. You act this way. Um, what what is it that we can do to sort of solve each other's differences? Because I act this way, I do these things, and that sort of thing." So work through that a little bit, but we have to listen to each other's perspective. Again, being an active listener a lot of times can help solve some relationship conflicts. The third is a value conflict, and this tends to be the most difficult to overcome because it's usually beyond just simple personality differences and traits, but something a little bit larger than that. So employees value fundamentally different things, often rooted in their life's upbringing, culture, religion, politics, ethics, norms, and other deeply held beliefs. So value conflicts often heighten defensiveness, distrust, and alienation. They can be the most difficult to overcome. Sometimes it's considered taboo to talk about things like politics and religion in the workplace, but there are times when value-related issues do get brought up, and we see a lot of these issues becoming more and more frequently in workplace environments. So, for example, team members dispute the ethics of working with a client who has ties to supposed unethical or corrupt businesses and governments, or team members argue over a politically charged issue like the implementation of an affirmative action program. So there might be issues directly related to their sense of morality and ethics, or their political leanings, and those can be challenging to overcome. So value conflicts typically need a commitment by all parties to move beyond demonization. We have to recognize that we are different, and we have to be comfortable with being pluralistic, meaning we have to be recognize that everybody's not going to think the same, and we have to find a way to move beyond just insulting each other or thinking negatively about each other and find a solution. In effort to learn the facts and understand each other's point of view, and then also have an ability to take a values neutral approach and look more at the facts and how the effects of this solution are going to impact stakeholders long term. So those are the three types of different types of conflicts. And it's good to be aware of the three types of conflicts as you're approaching conflict management. So you can say, okay, well, this is more of a task-oriented thing. This is a relationship-oriented thing, or this is a value-oriented issue that we can work to overcome. Okay, so with that in mind, let's walk through the 6 steps for resolving conflict. If you want to acknowledge a problem exists, you want to find a neutral place to meet, express perspectives and feelings, define the problem, impact, and need, identify areas of agreement, and then discover alternative solutions. Okay, so the first step in solving problems is, of course, to acknowledge that a problem exists, which can sound obvious, but sometimes we're not always aware that a problem is happening. So we need to be able to consciously or even vocally say, there is a problem here and it needs to be fixed. And once we can say that, we can start moving forward. So a problem likely exists if a few things are happening. So maybe tasks are taking longer than expected or seem more difficult than necessary. If those are happening, there's probably a problem. Maybe deadlines are being missed or stakeholders are becoming impatient because you're not getting them what they need. Or you were given feedback that didn't align with your understanding of your role, tasks, or expectations. Maybe someone is telling you that you should be doing something that you don't think you need to be doing, or that you didn't understand was a part of your role and expectations. That would create a problem. You feel frustrated or confused about the work you are expected to do. Maybe it's not totally clear, or it's you don't have the resources that you need to accomplish it, so you're feeling frustrated. That, again, identifies a problem. So you feel offended maybe by comments or actions made by another coworker. somebody has said something or done something that upsets you, that also creates problems. Or lastly, you're unable to work well with another person because their style, background, culture, or experience conflicts with yours. So any of these types of things would usually generate a problem. And so once you notice this, you have to actively say, okay, there's a problem here. We need to fix it. That's step one. Step two then is to find a neutral place and time to meet with all stakeholders involved. Once you recognize what the problem is and who it is with whom it is, you can now define or set up a place and a time to meet. So locate a physical or virtual space where all will feel comfortable and able to share their voice and perspective. Sometimes it's just with one person, sometimes it's with multiple people, but find that space where you can meet with them. So a few things about neutral spaces. They are easily accessible to all involved in the conflict in time, location, and technology. Don't do just what's convenient for you, but do what's best for all involved. Create a space where everybody can feel comfortable. Otherwise, you're already starting off in the wrong spot. If you're only doing what's working best for you, that's going to marginalize, alienate, or frustrate the person that you're trying to resolve the conflict with. Next, provide multiple ways to comment and listen, especially for individuals with disabilities. So again, if you have multiple members of your team or someone that you need to talk to that needs to communicate in other ways, provide a space where everybody can contribute. So that might require a virtual space where there's a voice, the chat, or closed captioning, or something like that. But make sure that it's totally neutral, that no one is in a position of authority or power over somebody else, or we can't resolve that conflict. Okay, neutral spaces are also emotionally and physically safe and comfortable, where discussions can be had without intimidation. Sometimes there are some spaces where people feel intimidated in a particular office or closed doors, or in a place where they can feel crowded or something like that. So make sure they feel emotionally and physically safe. And then they're not impacted by power dynamics. Individuals should not feel that they're being judged, that they are being observed by an authority figure, or that their comments will affect their standing in their company or with their job or anything like that. To truly overcome conflict and to be able to have an open and honest and authentic discussion, people cannot feel like they are being silenced or intimidated. That just doesn't help to resolve conflict. Okay, so you've identified the problem, you found a neutral place and time to meet. Now we're going to move into step 3, express perspectives and feelings. This is where you sit around and you have a conversation with each other and you take turns sharing individual feelings and perspectives. You need to be open to understanding others' points of view, and you need to give each person their time and space to talk. So when you share, ensure that there is enough time for all involved to speak. Everybody should be able to share everything they have to say. Allow all members the opportunity to share their feelings without interruption. So take turns until all have spoken. Each person should have a time and a space to share their own feelings, frustrations, etc. Share both what you feel is going well first, and then describe areas of frustration or pain points as you see them. So you can say, hey, I feel like this is going really well within our team, and I appreciate this, this, and this. However, this is where I'm frustrated. I'm having a hard time with this. This particular thing is frustrating and offensive to me, or whatever else. So you can just kind of lay that out in the open. Listen intently to what others are saying using active listening skills that we talked about in Module 2.3. Okay, now in step 4, you're going to define the problem, impact, and need. So now that you've all discussed your points of frustration, you can start to narrow down what the root of the problem is. So you work together to specifically identify the problem and the extent to which it impacts stakeholders. So to define the problem, first of all, expect discussion and debate. Complex problems may take time to parse out and resolve. You may not resolve this in just a couple of minutes. Plan more than one meeting if necessary. Then you want to summarize your key points using a respectful tone. So what I'm hearing from Maya is, or based on what's been discussed, I'm understanding that. So again, you're being respectful, you're trying to clarify key issues, you're trying to narrow and find the root of the problem collectively. Again, collectively map out the problems, consider writing down or drawing them out. So you might have someone kind of take notes, you might kind of map out a problem on a whiteboard or something like that. Break them down into sub-problems if needed. And then be able to state the primary and subproblems in succinct statements that are clear to all in the group. And then come to an agreement on how serious the problem is and to what extent it needs to be resolved. Is this something that can be resolved quickly and has kind of a minimal effect on the project or on stakeholders? Or is this a big deal that really is going to make major problems in the issue if it's not fixed, so that you can understand the importance of solving this problem? Okay, then in step 5, you want to identify areas of agreement. So now you've identified all of the different areas the problem, or you've defined what the problem actually is. Now build consensus and work towards a solution. So to identify areas of agreement, you want to keep a positive, team-centered, problem-solving attitude as opposed to a competitive or combative approach. Share areas of agreement using positive statements like, it sounds like we can all agree that, and is it safe to say that we are in agreement with this? And once you kind of identify all the points of agreement, then you can start learning where you need to make compromises. Avoid letting someone dominate, overwhelm with their perspective, or silence others in the group. Be very careful to notice if anybody seems to be dominating the direction of the conversation. Make sure all voices are heard. Okay, and then in step 6, we need to discover alternative solutions. This is where we map out a plan that all can agree on moving forward. So to create an alternative solution, we need to note areas of agreement, as we just talked about, and any compromises that have to be made to move forward. Prepare to negotiate and compromise in an effort to keep the team moving forward. That's the key. A lot of times we get stuck on what has happened and we get frustrated and angry and we don't want to move forward. Be prepared to negotiate and compromise, recognizing that you have to move forward. So maybe you have to compromise some, others in the team have to compromise some. You might have to negotiate a bit on what needs to happen to make that work. Identify any changes in roles, tasks, processes, or behaviors that need to take place, and make sure that all are in agreement. Maybe something you're doing just isn't working well, and you say, hey, I could use some help with this, or I could maybe need a role reassignment or something like that. As long as everybody's in agreement, then you can move forward. Write down the plan on a shareable document that includes roles, tasks, and process changes so that everybody's clear, so that they can be referenced later, and there's something that holds each person accountable to their new roles and responsibilities. And then just, again, think of the process as iterative and progressive, meaning that it will continue changing and evolving, and you're always trying to make progress. More problems will likely arise. The team will just need to continue to meet to resolve conflicts. So being flexible within a team and making, kind of seeing that as a recursive, iterative process that just keeps flowing forward as you work to resolve new conflicts as they continue to arise. All right, so that is how we resolve conflicts. Next, we're going to go into the last segment here in Module 2 about giving feedback. Okay, Module 2.5. In this last segment of Module 2, we're going to talk about giving effective feedback, a critical part to a good team communication. All right, you can see this thought on board. Giving effective feedback to peers and employees is an excellent way to put your emotional intelligence to work. This is a chance to use your emotional intelligence to give something productive and useful to members of your team and employees. I love this thought from Deborah Barrett. She's the author of a book called Leadership Communication. She says, quote, "It is through feedback that people develop, particularly if the leader providing the feedback recognizes its potential value and uses it as a way to bring about the receiver's improvement." And really, that's what giving feedback is about. It's helping people improve. So again, similar to the way we talk about conflict management in terms of having a positive approach and attitude, giving feedback should also be viewed as just that, a positive approach to helping people improve. So I want to share a few facts about receiving feedback, because it is a critical part to the way we see our work life. Most employees want and expect feedback at work. It is important to help people grow and to understand their expectations, their roles and responsibilities, and how well they're doing. A few things here. 65% of employees desire more feedback. That's a pretty high number. So be thinking and asking yourself, are you providing enough feedback, especially if you're in a leadership role of some kind? Do you give enough feedback to your employees, or do you think they were part of that 65% who wishes they got more? Uh, Companies that invest in regular employee feedback have 14.9% lower turnover rates than organizations where employees do not receive regular feedback. So you can actually retain employees better if they're getting regular feedback. 69% of employees say they would work harder if they felt their efforts were being recognized through feedback. They say that they would work harder if they felt they were being recognized. That's a fairly high number there. It's almost 7 in every 10 employees would work harder if they were being recognized through feedback. 43% of highly engaged employees receive feedback at least once a week. So when they review who counts as a highly engaged employee, we find out that those who are tend to receive feedback at least once a week. So they're more engaged in their work. And this last one's a huge number. 98% of employees disengage from their work when they receive little or no feedback. So if you never get feedback, you're less likely to stay engaged with your work. So that's a very critical part to keeping people engaged. All right, so before we get too far into giving feedback, I want to identify the difference between feedback, good quality feedback, versus what we often call performance reviews. So reviews are not feedback, okay? At least they're not a quality form of feedback. So things like annual performance reviews are not the same as feedback. In that study we were just looking at before, only 14% of employees agree that performance reviews help them improve. Timing usually makes them irrelevant. So some companies do like an annual performance review. But a lot of times when those reviews happen, they happen at a time that's not real helpful. Maybe an employee had a problem 6 or 7 months ago, and now that's showing up in the performance review, but that's not helpful at that moment. A lot of times also performance reviews are very standardized, and they look at metrics that are not necessarily all that accurate, which comes to the second problem of performance evaluations. They lack usefulness. They're usually predefined evaluation metrics that don't accurately define what employees do and how well they work. They don't effectively measure an employee's job performance and contributions to a team. Whereas feedback would do better at that, where you're doing them a little bit more regularly. You're talking to them about their job performance and how they're interacting with the team and how things are going in the moments that matter. So lastly, it says good feedback does happen more regularly. Simple feedback could even happen weekly, or maybe more complex feedback happens every 3 to 6 months. But the key is to provide feedback when it matters most to employees. So be thinking of good quality feedback as something different, something richer in experience than just a performance review. It's more than that. It's a conversation about what's going well, about what's not going well. It's a two-way interaction with you and the employee that you're talking to and giving the feedback with. So, all right, as you're thinking about giving feedback, first of all, you want to approach it, or at least understand it needs to have 3 key elements. First of all, when you give feedback, it needs to include both praise and criticism. Don't approach it with just a criticism mentality, but rather give both. Also, don't approach it with just a praise mentality, because that, again, doesn't help people improve. So people receiving criticism should know what they're doing well, but also learn where they can improve. Negative feedback can only result in confusion, frustration, and resentment. If that's all they're getting is negative feedback, they might be confused. They're not sure what they're doing right. They might start to resent you or the company. So make sure you're doing both so that they can recognize what's working and what's not. Also, when you give feedback, you have to be very specific. If you're not specific, it doesn't really help the person being reviewed, or the person that you are providing feedback to. So don't say things like, you didn't pitch that product very well to the client. Okay, that doesn't mean a lot to the person receiving feedback. Okay, so they didn't do well, but how are you going to improve? Always have it with that improve mentality. So say something more like this. If you had started with a clear problem statement, presented the need and opportunity, transitioned into the research methods, and then gave the recommendations, it would have been more persuasive. So now they know, okay, I understand what I need to do to fix the problem when I present to the client. So again, it's an opportunity to learn and to grow. And then also lastly, that when you give feedback, that it should be a listening experience, not just a telling experience. Well, sometimes, especially if you're in a leadership position giving feedback, you feel like you just need to dump a lot of information and instruction, advice, counsel, or whatever it might be. Recognize that good feedback is about coaching and mentoring, not dictating and commanding. So it requires empathy and it requires a two-way conversation. Be open to what the person that you're giving feedback to has to say about the feedback and to be able to respond to it. Okay, similar to these three key elements, you also want to be thinking about giving feedback in terms of the GROW or the GROW model. This is a very popular diagram that's been recreated over and over again. It was created by Sir John Whitmore and popularized in the 1980s and 90s, but you'll see this in a lot of leadership and management books about how to provide feedback. But you'll see here this acronym, GROW, walks through four different primary things that should be happening in feedback. You should be setting goals. You should establish reality in comparison to those goals. You should create the options for improving, and then also setting an action plan or a way forward. So goal, reality, options, and a way forward. You can see there from top left going in a clockwise order. In the goal, you should you should mention what's going to be discussed, what the objectives of the session are going to be, and what the long-time purpose of the meeting is. Those kind of setting those goals. Then reality, you want to ask what their perspective is on how things are going, give the praise and feedback, avoid any assumptions about them or about the project or their work. Make sure it's very fact-driven. And then disregard irrelevant history. Maybe there's something they've done in the past that's been problematic, but they haven't done it recently and it's not related to their current review. So set up the reality as it is now and current. Then in the options, you discuss possible options, invite suggestions, and make decisions. And I'm going to walk through these in a little bit more detail next. And then lastly, way forward, you set an action plan, you identify any obstacles to acting according to the plan, and so forth. So this is a helpful model that you can use when thinking about the big concepts, of course, in your feedback sessions. Okay, with those in mind, with those three main concepts in the GROW model, let's walk through the 5 steps here to finish out this segment. The 5 steps to give while giving feedback. You're going to prepare in advance for your meeting. You're going to stage the setting, establish the context in which the meeting is happening. You're going to discuss the key topics and then formulate that action plan at the end. So this is how you put together a feedback session to give good quality feedback. So first of all, prepare. To prepare for the meeting, you should do a few things. First of all, know who you're reviewing and why. Don't just let people randomly come into your office at just a scheduled time to do a performance review or a feedback session. Rather, understand who's coming in, why it's important that you're reviewing them. Gather facts and relevant information about the person receiving feedback. So this might require you to review their work or their progress. If there's any data that your company collects, it might require you to collect a report or a letter from them where they're talking about their own work. You might have a committee that reviews different files depending on the industry that you're in, but you're gathering facts and relevant information before you can give the feedback. It's not helpful to sit down and talk to somebody before you've really reviewed all of their work and progress and their interactions with other employees and clients and so forth. Okay, so then prepare a fact-based statement of appraisal. In other words, how well are they doing? Where are the issues that have arisen? So again, make sure it's fact-based, that it's not based on assumptions or based on their personality or anything like that, but it's based on facts that you can see what they have produced. And then be conscious of any contextual, cultural, or other issues that may have affected the person's performance. If there's something in their personal life that happened, or maybe there's a circumstance with a client that arose, or maybe there was an emotionally taxing period of time, you want to be conscious of any contextual information that might impact the way their performance is being reviewed. And also, sometimes there's things within their culture or background that might, or experience or knowledge level, or whatever else that might also be impacting that. So make sure you're considering all things when you're in preparation for this meeting. And then lastly, create an agenda of key talking points to make sure that you can stay on task and that you address the key issues. So include any questions that you have for the person that you're giving the feedback to, the receiver. Identify their strengths, those points of feedback you want to give them, and then ideas for a plan. So again, getting that positive feedback, the things that need to be improved, and then areas for plan. But have this all written out so that you can be on task, very focused, and you can make sure what needs to be said is actually said. Okay, so that is step one in preparation for the meeting. Step two, you want to stage the setting. Make sure you're in an environment that is conducive to providing good feedback. Consider meeting in their office or a neutral setting rather than them coming to you, especially if you're in a position of authority over them. Sometimes that space can feel a little awkward or intimidating. Rather meet in their office or in a place where it's neutral and they can feel comfortable being there and they don't feel necessarily that strong power dynamic in there. Avoid sitting behind a desk or in a position that appears authoritative or authoritarian. Sit in an open and welcoming environment. You can see in this photo there where they're more next to each other and not behind a desk. They can see each other face to face. They're opened up. It feels more natural and friendly when you're in that sort of a space. Express positive emotion and a welcoming demeanor. Not every feedback session necessarily has a lot of positive or a lot of happiness to it. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed, but you still should let them know that you are a welcoming individual, that you are looking forward to having this conversation. This is something to help move forward. And so there should be a welcoming and friendly and positive sentiment in the session as you set up. Okay, so now you've prepared and you've set up the stage. Now you're going to establish the context with this individual. You're going to talk them through why this meeting is even happening. So explain the purpose of the meeting and why they are there. What kind of effect does this have on their work? Is this going to go into a permanent record? Are you there to talk about something for promotion or for, is it just a regular evaluation? Is there a behavior problem? So, we need to address something serious that they, some issue that they have caused or whatever it might be. You want to make sure that's clear right up front. Why are they there? And how does this affect them personally and professionally in their work? Okay, number two, then clarify if the review is a result of poor performance or behavior, or if it is a regularly scheduled review. This is our monthly review. We're just going to talk about these things to make sure we're on track. Or, something has come to light and we need to talk about some issues that we're seeing in this particular project or in your relationships with your colleagues or something like that. Stick to the facts only. Avoid bias and hearsay. If you've heard things about this particular employee, if you if you've experienced some sort of bias because of an interaction you had with them, don't let those come into the meeting. You're sticking only to the facts. How well are they performing? How well are they doing their work, the work that they are supposed to be doing, and leave everything else out of the conversation. Okay, now this is the big one, which is discussing the key topics. This is where you're getting into the bulk of the conversation to make sure you're addressing everything that needs to be hit. So as you're doing this, use the I voice instead of you. You don't want to sound attacking. Rather, you want to sound like you are addressing the issues as you understand them. So use that I voice. Instead of saying, your behavior is slowing the project down, which is an accusatory statement, say things like, I've noticed some bottlenecks and snags happening with the project. Is there something I should know? Again, that doesn't lay the blame on them, and it opens up an opportunity for dialogue and allows them to share more openly what has happened. But if you accuse them right off, they can feel defensive, and that can close off some of the information gathering, and they can feel attacked. And again, that can damage culture. It can damage their ability to function appropriately. And again, it's not helpful. It doesn't help them improve. So use that I voice. Stick to 3 or 4 key objectives. If there's dozens of things that you feel like this person could improve on, don't overwhelm them in this moment. Stick to 3 or 4. Maybe lump them into categories, but say there's 3 things I'd like to talk about in terms of the way that this is going, so they can have actionable things to be thinking about that they can work on. Number three, stay organized and stick to the key objectives. Again, stick to the plan that you mapped out in preparation, stick to the key points, and then allow the person receiving the feedback to ask questions between each key point. So you might say, okay, I want to talk first about this. Once you've talked about that, let them add comments or questions or clarify anything before you move on to the next thing. But stay organized and stick to the key areas that you need to discuss. And then remember to comment only on performance and behavior that can be corrected. Don't comment on personality or other things that are unrelated to this particular employee's work and their job title and their job description. Make sure you're only talking about the stuff that can be corrected and that can be fixed. We don't need to delve into other areas that bring in unnecessary negativity and confusion. All right, and then last part here in discussion is to don't assume they understand everything. Allow them time to ask questions and clarify. Don't just end a meeting and say, all right, that's it. Say, hey, do you have any questions or anything else I can help with? Anything that came up during our discussion that you would like me to clarify? Okay, and then number 5, to formulate the action plan. This is kind of the last phase here, but keep in mind any additional information that you learned from the person while giving feedback. So as they've added comments and commentary and insights, you may have learned something that changes the way you think about feedback and your action plan. So keep that in mind. But you want to give them advice on what to do next. State the actions that need to be implemented. Again, stick to 3 or 4. So in relation to the 3 or 4 or 5 key points that you want to address, you'll have an action plan probably for each, but keep them minimized so they can actually accomplish these things. And it will be helpful if you write those down and give them this particular action plan as stated as you see them, and with clear descriptions and processes. Ask if the person has additional perspective, concerns, or any reasons why the actions may not be feasible. You might have come up with an action plan like, you know what, that actually isn't possible for me because I don't have access to this particular resource, or I don't even know that, or something like that. Or, there may be a real legitimate reason why the action plan will not work, and you want to make sure that they can express those reasons. And then lastly, you want to set a timeline for actions and a date for a follow-up meeting. So make sure that there is a timeline set forth for those actions to be accomplished. So if you're going to give them things to work on, say, I want you to work on these over the next 4 weeks. We will meet in a month. Let's go ahead and set a date, and we can talk about how things were going a month from now. Once you've done all of this, the final thing then is to follow a similar structure when you follow up in that meeting. So using the action plan as the context and key topics. So you'll set up another meeting, and then you're going to follow that same structure for your follow-up, but you're going to talk about all the action plan items and see how they've done and see where the improvement is. All right, well, that is it for providing feedback. We are going to move now into the next big module where we're going to talk about written communication and walk through some very specific ways to improve your writing and communication in the workplace. We'll see you in Module 3.